Welcome to the Mystery College podcast. Today, we're doing an interview with Arden Leigh. So she is the founder of the Repatterning Project, which is a course in understanding the human operating system and repatterning trauma, imprints, and social conditioning in order to achieve creative freedom. She's also the sole apprentice and spiritual lineage heir to chaos magician Grant Morrison, as well as the front woman and sole proprietor of music project Arden and the Wolves, through which she uses narrative magic to alter reality through her songwriting. Her certifications are in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, hypnosis, and timeline therapy. She's currently at work on her next book, and if you want to learn more about her projects and what she's up to, visit repatteringproject.com. So Arden has like a huge scope of different talents, skills, and amazing projects that she's manifested. And one thing I really liked looking at in the Repattering Project was learning how to manifest your dream life, your creativity, and the projects. And so I love that you're like a living embodiment of those very principles that you teach and share. So I also wanted to understand like what inspired you to create the Repattering Project.
Oh, definitely my trauma. Yeah, I'm someone who got into magic, and very quickly after I began doing magic and seeing results, you realize that when you have the power to change something, that it removes your excuses for not changing the things that you may be complaining about in life. And I definitely grew up with a strong degree of childhood trauma, and then, that sort of leading to patterns that replicated that in my adulthood, my early adulthood, throughout my 20s. And then, when it was sort of like all of that sort of accumulated trauma and ongoing programming had kind of taken me, to that point where you're just like, I'm doing the same thing, and it's just, why is this not working? Why am I not? I consider myself a smart person. Why do I still run into all of XYZ issues? Why haven't I figured out how to be happy, how to really thrive? And at that point, I had moved out of New York. That was sort of the big culmination of like, I'm gonna just start my life over and get a fresh start somewhere else. And once in Los Angeles, I began studying magic as a way of almost sort of rebalancing myself and resensitizing myself and reclaiming, my feminine, for lack of a better word. While I don't typically think of magic as feminine, when you're moving from New York, which is somewhere that is a very hyper masculine and hyper logical, where, at least in the circles that I was in, anything that was sort of overly feminine, overly woo, witchy was kind of disdained, if you were not logical and rational, etc. So I had my NLP cert, I was certified in hypnosis and things like that. And which then you start learning magic and you realize how closely those things are. You're like, oh, this is a lot of this is two sides of the same coin. But I moved out to Los Angeles because I could feel how imbalanced I was after so long living in New York. And I immediately began studying magic and practicing magic. And I also was involved in sort of New Age adjacent circles enough that a lot of the magic that I started practicing was based on a lot of those sort of very fluffy New Age principles of, I am in alignment with my highest self, like all of that. But the funny thing is that when you combine, as much as I have some legitimate critiques of not only New Age thought, but also the way that is taught and the way that a lot of New Age circles conduct their communities, which I feel like tends to have a lot of shadow, because when you have that much like high vibe, there's also like, the stuff you're trying to maybe cover up that you're not, you don't want to admit that, you maybe have it going on. And, but when you take those principles and you combine them with something like sigil magic, you actually get, as it turns out, a pretty decent roadmap for doing magic that really does get you in alignment with yourself. And it really does, like, you're like, I want to be of service to my community. Okay, good job. You're going to have to go through some stuff first, in order to learn those lessons and, bring back that hero's journey elixir, etc. But man, it works. And for me, it was also, I believe, I had set an intention to study chaos magic in particular, because I was a big fan of Grant Morrison and their magical talks and their magical methods that they spoke about publicly, even before I became their apprentice. And basically sort of setting off with an intention to become a chaos magician, beginning to launch sigils, and then one of the first several sigils that I was launching, basically leading me into the path of examining all of my past trauma and looking at those patterns and finding out where they had come from, and kind of realizing, without really necessarily going the obvious chaos magic way about it, kind of realizing through my research into trauma psychology and my research into addiction research and attachment styles and post-traumatic stress and all these other things, and then also on the other hand, like manifestation and Joe Dispenza and the ways that you then kind of create a future after you maybe have disentangled yourself from the way that the past has been imprinted upon you and is affecting your decisions in the present moment. And I kind of realized that after putting all that together and integrating it and going through my own repatterning and examining everywhere where I was essentially carrying out behaviors and holding on to beliefs that, despite the fact that I had plenty of empirical evidence for them in my past, were not generating a future that was making me happy. And after going through that process for myself, coming out the other side of it and finally sort of sitting down to like maybe I should finally read those chaos magic books that I bought a couple of years ago, now that I've been through this whole trauma healing thing, and then opening up some of those texts and seeing things like, oh, hey, your beliefs aren't necessarily true. You might as well choose the ones that work for you. And things like nothing is true, everything is permitted, and whatever you believe, whatever actions you take, are measured in their efficacy of the results that you get. And sitting there honestly really dumbfounded and being like, remember when I set that intention about I wanted to be a chaos magician a couple of years ago? And realizing that this was basically the trauma-informed version of what chaos magic was. This idea that our programming, our conditioning, our behaviors are largely dictated by our experiential interactions with the world, and that they live in our mind-body system, and then they continue to generate a future that we have our timeline in the past, and then that affects us, and it generates the things that are going to happen in the future. And that this mind-body system is ours. It is under our domain. There's no one who owns our, we may have had a lot of other people imprinting us or traumatizing us throughout our lives or conditioning us in whatever ways, but the way that this exists in my system in the present moment, this is mine. This is mine to control. I choose what I believe. I choose the ways that I respond. And even when it's hard, right? Even when you're digging up something that is so rooted in there in trauma that you're like, this sucks, I hate it. And I empathize with that, but okay, that's fine. You can, it can suck for a while. You can hate it for a while, but keep going and you're going to see things turn around. And so when I got to the other side of that, it was just sort of, I had set an intention even before that whole journey. I was like moving to Los Angeles. I was like, I want to be a spiritual facilitator, and the universe certainly put me through my paces to give me something that I actually felt passionate about teaching about. So I came out the other side and was like, well, I guess I know what I'm teaching for the rest of my life.
Yeah. And I absolutely love the whole scope of, rooting through our past, resolving traumas, and figuring out like a new timeline for ourselves, and being in that present moment, like you said. And
Yeah.
that maybe one of the words that really stood out to me of what you said was having a trauma-informed spiritual practice. 'Cause I think that, to me, like, I think you may have been one of the first people or the first person I came across who combined trauma-informed and then, and then spirituality together. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. Like, that's exactly the next paradigm. Because, like, for me, I don't think I've met any, like most, like, friends or people I know, teachers, mentors, like they all have like serious trauma in some aspects of their life, like, in definitely childhood too. And I, speaking for myself as well, that's definitely one of the things that drew me to this type of work, was being like, okay, a lot of these different things seem to not be working for me, like, traditionally. So let me go and let's try out magic. And then, oh, wow, okay. But I think having that trauma informed layer, that adds so much context and adds so much more resourcefulness for our work.
Yeah, I think it's, it's most important that it's rooted in compassion, right? And it's, for me, it's yes, being trauma informed is important, but especially since that is, and I know I use that word, right? But it is such a buzzword today. But really what it means for me is, it means actually understanding the mechanics of my mind-body system. It's just about what is true, right? It's just about what is actually mechanistically going on, so that I can understand why I act this way. Because I want to have compassion for myself, about the ways that I may have enacted, my past responses or whatever. And understanding, like, oh, at this point in the timeline, I had an interaction here and I learned, quote unquote, my system, my mind-body system learned that in this moment that this was unsafe, or that if I reacted in this defensive way, then perhaps I could protect myself, and then we overlearn these patterns, they get stuck, they become our default responses. And looking at that, all that really does for me is, I shouldn't say all, but primarily what that does is it decouples it from what I think of as my personality. First of all, I may have thought, like, well, this is just the way that I am because it feels natural for me to respond this way. And if it feels natural for me to respond this way, then this must be my authentic expression, which is not always. and it also gives us, I think, compassion for a world, and like which you were saying, you're like, I have childhood trauma, you have childhood trauma, teachers have childhood trauma. We are born into this world that is not by default setting us up for success. So we kind of need to understand the larger context of things and I think this is where so much of New Age spirituality unfortunately teaches this in an irresponsible manner, because it becomes this point of like, oh, I'm creating my reality. If you're unhappy, you must not be creating your reality, or you're in victim mentality, or you're this or that, or whatever. And so it's like, how are you going to help someone if the first thing you're doing is trying to make them feel bad about themselves, right? Or like, oh, well, you should be doing better or whatever. So if we understand the larger context of our world, and that this is not something that we're taught in schools, that we're not given this information. I mean, when I first put all of this together, frankly, because I also went through the traditional mental health industrial complex methods, and they did not work for me either. By far, they made things worse, if anything, in most situations. And still to this day, I'm still hearing horror stories where I'm like, oh my God, that's how you're treating this. Is I just yeah. So I think it's important that we really just look realistically at what is going on when our patterns and habits form. Because if we don't understand that, in my viewpoint, then we can't actually go in there and change it and have compassion for ourselves around why it formed.
Yeah, I think that role of compassion, that's like such a key term, to have compassion through the process. And yeah, and I think that's another thing I've observed is for lack of better words, like there's not much language around compassion, and especially more serious, like esoteric communities where they're reading old grimoires and this or that. It can get very rigid, and I think that can get people stuck in armchair theory.
Oh yeah, I am actually doing that. This is actually partly the reason why I was a few minutes late signing on this morning, is because I forgot I'm now in the 3rd month of my 4-month grimoire magic that I'm now doing, and so I got up and realized that the set of names that I needed to pronounce, I was like, oh, I'll be done with this in time. So I was like, oh no, it's the next month, and I have a whole new set of names that I now need to sound out loud. So and the grimoire magic that I happen to be doing happens to be it's the ars notoria. It's the art of magic of rapid learning. So in terms of repatterning, this has been a fascinating experience for me, because what are we doing in repatterning if not working with those same learning systems, that working with those neural pathways? And what I'm finding in doing this grimoire magic is it is giving me such a deeper appreciation for what it feels like when you are forming those neural pathways more quickly than should maybe technically be humanly possible. So it's so funny, because it's like it's actually quite they are not mutually exclusive, repatterning and grimoire magic. And angels, I mean, they have a lot of compassion, let me tell you. I have definitely benefited a great deal from their compassion these past 2 months.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love the segue into the Ars Memoria, because I was just thinking about mnemonics just this morning. Actually, I was like, that'd be cool if there's some sort of path working that was integrated with spirituality. I was like, oh, that's right. It's awesome. You brought that up. I'd like to know too a bit more about like some of the other kind of components of the repatterning project, like there's neuroscience, there's magic, there's law of attraction, and there's processes that help people gain self-mastery and whatever specific domains of their interest. Would you mind walking me through like how does someone start, like their first steps, their baby steps into repatterning?
Oh, great question. I can sort of take you through the general, the TLDR of the course, which is that the first week we focus on like, this is how your patterns form. This is why you may end up getting stuck in them, and this is why you're like this. Basically, this is why this happens, and also it's not your fault that you didn't know any of this, and and also I can't change the world. I can't make the world a more fair place, but I can teach you how to navigate this world and how to give yourself an advantage. And at week 2, we look at information and memory processing, how things get stored in the mind, and why. For example, how confirmation bias intersects with law of attraction, right? Law of attraction is something that is really weaponized out there in a lot of, the more new age communities. And really when you unpack it, it's not even something that is necessarily even a spiritual principle as much it is literally in our information and memory processing, and our selection bias, and the ways that we, gravitate toward that which is familiar, et cetera, et cetera. So we look at that, and we look at the ways the beliefs are formed, and then we learn how to backwards engineer them. And it's like, well, if that's how it works, then here are the things that you want to, familiarize yourself with so that you can create more of them, et cetera. And then in weeks 3 and 4, we actually go through a pretty long assessment called the PTSI, where we took a look at 8 different trauma profiles, which are the most common post-traumatic kind of ongoing patterns that may set in a person's life. And we do that assessment. And we also look at things like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint, the 5 Fs, like the ways that we can, even though these are legitimate survival mechanisms in us, because of our information and memory processing, the way that we will repeat the behaviors that we feel work, we can overlearn any one of those 5 Fs past the point of diminishing returns, the point where that becomes a more default response. And we want to make sure we draw back from that and not and remove any filter that is perhaps causing us to perceive a threat where there is actually not a threat due to the familiarity of our past trauma. And then, of course, we look at relationships and attachment styles, and we talk about polarity as well. And that is such a, I hate even saying the word, because it is so mistaught out there lately that I feel like just saying polarity makes me, people are going to think I'm some like super heteronormative gender role, divine masculine, divine, and I'm not. I actually teach polarity in the opposite way, that it's about bringing yourself into balance so that you can be in harmony, taking those polarized attachment styles, bringing them, into security. And then we look at essentially like, all right, well, now you probably started, you probably started making some changes. We look at those profiles and we look at those ways of being and start to look at ways we can turn those around and ways we can replace them with behaviors that essentially responses that better meet the very legitimate underlying needs, right? The underlying need there is completely legitimate, but our strategy is probably off. So if we mindfully, consciously replace that, we can start changing the results that we get. And in week 6, we start kind of looking at where once we start getting that underway, we might start losing a lot of the people around us, and we might start having a lot of like guilt and shame for our past behaviors. And we can all of a sudden be like, oh my gosh, like, am I having spiritual growth or am I being an asshole? Which is a good question. And I have a handy dandy checklist in that module, because sometimes it's a fine line. And how to deal with that, right? How to deal with being in the void, being alone for a little while, being in the cocoon, which inevitably happens in these processes because you're gonna detach from your old reality. And if you haven't built the foundation yet, you're gonna have to get comfortable being in this, in the muck of it for a little while. But then once you've gotten your energy back, and the beautiful thing about being in the void is that you're in the emptiness of this, the womb space of infinite creation. And so what you can do from there is you finally have the bandwidth and the peace to be like, well, this is my one precious life, and I am exactly here on my timeline, and everything up to here has happened, but I have this precious life ahead of me. What do I actually want to do with it? And now that I have all this energy back from where I'm not using those same coping mechanisms anymore, I actually maybe have the bandwidth for the first time in my life to pursue the dreams that are really meaningful to me. And then finally in week 8, we're like, okay, and now how are you going to build that out from here? How are you going to use what resources you have in order to actually make that a reality? How do you know like which step to take next, when you might need help, et cetera, et cetera. And essentially, blasting through your limiting beliefs. I sound like the NLP bros, but really kind of showing you the ways that that pursuing your dreams really is possible with this focused attention and with the ability that you now have to repattern yourself for whatever beliefs, behaviors, and mindsets that you need to meet those dreams. Once you know that you can repattern out of your trauma, then you can backwards engineer and install the beliefs, habits, and mindsets that actually get you to embodying and truly being that highest version of yourself, whatever that looks like. In fact, I don't even like to say highest version most times. I just like to say like your favorite version, because that really is it, right? It's less about being, the best or the highest. It's really about being the most authentically yourself. And that authentic selfhood, I think, lies in what we are most happy with, what brings us the most joy every day. So that's the TLDR. And then, of course, I teach the course Myths and Magic, which is the one I have coming up this fall, which is the more like right brain sister course of the repatterning project, which is about the narratives and the stories that we either consciously or unconsciously tell about ourselves and to ourselves throughout our lives, and the archetypes that we either consciously or unconsciously take on, and the contracts that with the universe that we agree to play these roles, and looking at having more agency and saying, I was sort of shoved into this role in my life, but maybe I want to be done with that contract. Maybe I want to stamp it completed, and I want to draw up a new one. This is who I want to be now. And so we do the magic around that allows you to bring in that energy and attract those experiences and embody those qualities that gives you that way of walking through the world.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I was noticing the backdrop of your room, and I was thinking like, oh, like that reminds me of like how much like you're mentioning something just before we started the talk around creating a space that helps amplify whom you're becoming. So I'd love to hear how that connects to like how you organize your physical space, or like new relationships or friendships, or like just enhancing your values in the environment around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in the idea that it is so much easier and more comfortable and more gratifying and more fulfilling if I have an environment that when I wake up every day, it affirms to me who I am. And I look around and I say, ah, yes, this is correct. This is exactly the story that I am telling with my life. And I look around, sometimes and I'll see Myths and Magic was almost sort of born out of this Twitter thread that I made in like 2017, of all things. And kind of like looking around and seeing how many people just lived by this default aesthetic of, even looking out, my balcony and seeing that all of my neighbors have their standard Venetian blinds that came with the apartment when they moved in, and they've got bikes on their balconies for like storage and whatnot, and seeing people that you look at them and you're like, you're wearing clothes that you bought for your office job and you just forgot who you were. This is the thing that you were taught is acceptable to be. And there was an online buddy of mine, Visa Kanvirasamy, who wrote Introspective, a couple and a Friendly Ambitious Nerd, a couple of really successful ebooks on Twitter. Back in the days when Twitter was Twitter, and he came back and he showed me, like years later, he was like, Arden, this Twitter thread that you wrote changed my life. Here I was, like before, this was me in like my office job with like the crew cut and the collar, the white collar, the button down. And I realized, he was like, I realized I was not alive in my own life. I was not embodied in my own life. So I started dressing differently and I started working out, and I wear more jewelry now. I wear fun clothing that makes me happy. And I like the way that I looked. And I realized that this is something that's under my control. And my entire outlook on myself has changed. And I take that even a little further and basically say the not just the aesthetic, right? Because it is also about the magic that causes us to embody those qualities. But it is easier for us to live that story if we are setting ourselves up for it as well, right? If, again, our environment, our clothing, these things, it doesn't even have to be expensive. I teach everyone that, you can do this, without having to remodel your entire apartment. You can do this, you can plan it out, and you can budget it, or you can work with what you have, etc. But basically making something where every day you are constantly affirming to your 5+ senses who you are. And so it's easy to feel that. There's, a region in our brain called the default mode network that basically is kind of like taking in our environmental senses at all times. And especially for neurodivergent folks, which I am ADHD, I'm autistic and ADHD. And especially for neurodivergent folks, can really make a difference in how we feel, and that the objects in our space can be things that are comforting to our nervous systems or not. And I think a big part of me also repatterning was giving myself an environment that could bring me sensory comfort. So it's about that too. But then, of course, like there's also the contract magic that will kind of bring these remarkable circumstances into your life, or cause these patterns to sort of come up in you, that you can release them, and then you can call in that new way of being, the things that'll challenge, where you might have stuff in shadow, and will give you a new way of being for walking through the world, which is always quite exciting.
Yeah. That's phenomenal. I love, I love the bringing up like just how the space enhances your beingness and opens up more doors available. And then I like the bridges you made to contract magic or neurodivergence, and having a space that like settles, cools, and helps direct your nervous system, your default mode network, into the place, the space where you feel like peak, you feel like you're your favorite person. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think that's important too for also attracting those connections that are going to be most aligned to us. I tell a story in the course when we do the module on, you know, your environment and how you know, whether it's your home environment or whether it's spaces that you create for bringing community together that is aligned with the same kind of vibe. I tell this story that you know, I live in an apartment in Los Angeles, and I had an apartment inspection one day, and I was still in bed. It was like 9 a.m. or something like that. And, you know, they knock, and then they come in before I get a chance to answer. And I just hear them, you know, inspection, whatever. And they come in, and I just hear this woman's voice go, "Oh my God." And I'm like, you know what? You're boring. And the thing is, that is exactly what my apartment aims to do. If you're going to walk in here and go like, "Oh, I would rather know that. I would rather you know that you don't want to be here," you know? So I can bring in the people who do want to be here, because just as, you know, I wouldn't say just as many, but the ones that matter, right? When I bring in people who are aligned to me, people who are right to be in my world. They walk in and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's so you know, or I love it. This is like exactly my thing too." Or they're like, "I love how right this is for you. And I love to come play in your world. And I have mine that looks like my world," or whatever. And we'll visit each other's worlds. And those are the people that I want in my life. So it's also a way of living authentically, is also a way of just filtering out those who are not right for you. If you're trying to appeal to everyone, it's, you know, first of all, you're never going to. And second of all, you miss out on, you know, vibing with the people who are actually right for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that also kind of plays into like creating a sustainable lifestyle change or sustainable changes through the magic or the repatterning that we're doing, right? As it, you know, coalesces and helps, like you said, reinforce. So yeah, I'm wondering so let's say someone like goes through the repatterning project or the story course that's going on in October.
Yeah.
So where might they see themselves 6 months from there, a year from there? Like I'm really curious.
Can I read you a testimonial?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
All right, I'm gonna find it in my folder here. But I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I definitely have an answer for it. And this testimonial is one that came to me from someone who took the course on the very first round. And basically, you know, this was like my baby beta intro version of the course, when it was still just, you know, it was still just a little zygote kind of coming to life. And 6 months later, she was one of the first people to post a testimonial, and she wrote this. And this is the moment that I knew, okay, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life now. Because I still, you know, coming out of intense trauma and just having repatterned and be like, okay, I'm ready to be out in the world now. You know, naturally there was a part of me that was like, hey, I just hope nobody asks for their money back. You know, you don't want to let people down. So so her name is Jerry Ann, and she's on my website, and this is what she said. She said, "For pretty much the entirety of my adulthood thus far, I felt like I had a millstone around my neck, like I could hustle all day, every day, and still never manage to escape poverty and depression. I've been working broadly and intensely for the past 5 years to overcoming the programming I received from negligent parents, abusive partners, financial desperation, etc. In the time since the repatterning project began, I've overcome, for the first time, and I think permanently, the suicidal ideation that had been my constant companion since around age 7, completely reworked my historically tumultuous relationship with my partner, begun to heal a complex set of injuries that had massively impacted my life and work for over 4 years, and taken the first bold steps into building a serious art career. The repatterning project has been rocket fuel for my evolution. It has done more to reveal my path to wholeness than years of therapy. It has given me the confidence and enthusiasm to book for 2019, quadruple the number of art shows I've done in any previous year. My art sales for the first 3 months of this year are already about half my total art sales for all of 2018. It's amazing to be on the cusp of my 30s and feel joyous and alive for the first time. And those magically inclined may also note that I'm in the depths of my Saturn return. So I wanted to share my list of things I love. Anyone thinking of investing in this program will find great things within. And 2 years later, this is what's amazing. 2 years later, I posted this when it came up in my memories. I was like, the first course, Jerry Ann, she was so amazing. I love this testimonial. 2 years later, she says this. And this, at this point, this would now have been 2021 that she was, so we were in the midst of the pandemic. And she says, okay, let me add to this. Since writing that, despite facing several huge and unexpected crises over the past few years, I still have not slipped back into a single suicidal thought pattern. I have also finally resolved my chronic pain issue, and I have my drawing hand back in proper working order. I also graduated with honors, and I started a new art career as an art director for an amazing new record label in Denver. So really, if you need your best guidance on becoming your best self and best life, et cetera, et cetera. So those are exactly the concrete results that I love to hear, where people are just like, all of this was going on, and suddenly I was just given the tools to change it. And is it still sometimes hard work? Yeah. Do I still sometimes have bad days? Yes. But I never fall back into those patterns of despair, because I always know that I have it in my capability, in my agency, to change something about the way that is, however my life is unfolding. I can change the way I respond. I can change the magic that I put out there, and I can create what I want for myself.
Yeah, I love that. Just knowing that, like, you always, even if we're having a bad day, we can fall back on our agency and the set of tools that we now have after having gone through this massive transformation, this program. Yeah, and so
it doesn't protect you from grief. You know, it doesn't protect you from like the loss that you're going to experience in your human life, but it does teach you how to control the controllables. And God grant me Zen Buddhism to accept the things that I cannot change, Abraham Hicks to change what I can, and divination to know the difference. Sorry, though, I interrupted you before.
Yeah. I think it's just really cool to hear like people's lives transforming, and I love the course curriculum, and I'm curious about like the community too, like how are people getting along in there, like, and like how like friendships made, or what type of dynamics are at play.
Yeah. Oh gosh, nothing makes me happier than seeing folks who meet either during the course or in the larger community around the repatterning project, who then end up visiting each other, supporting each other, cool things like that. We have a group on Facebook. It's a free group. It's a private group, but it's free. You just have to like answer the questions. So I know that it's one of those, knock 3 times if you want to be, if you want to be an initiate, right? I have to know that you want to be there. So you have to answer the little questions to join the group. But yeah, the group is called the Repatterning Parlor. And so you can find me, Arden Leigh, on Facebook, or you can just look up the Repatterning Parlor and you can come and join us. And we just kind of share memes and we geek out, but it always really makes me happy when folks say like, hey, I'm dealing with an issue, and this is actually the only space that I feel safe talking about this and getting feedback, because everyone is just so cool and so supportive, and there really is no like victim blaming. It really just is about finding the solutions. I mean, if there is victim blaming, I'll boot that person from the group, or I'll probably speak to them first, but like, the culture we've created is just like really grounded and supportive. And like, we know that life has its difficulties, and we're kind of all in it to help each other out and to hack it along the way, however we can.
Yeah. And, I'm wondering how like having, facilitated, kind of channeled, transmitted, and having facilitated all these repatterning projects, like course experiences and programs, and having led to transformations in people's lives. I'm wondering how that sort of, how this evolved into like, or reinformed like your music practice as well. Because that's
yeah. I would actually say that is much more on the myths and magic side, but I can definitely talk about that. So I'm trying to think. It's kind of a chicken or egg thing. But I first, of course, heard of the term hypersigil from, of course, Grant, who would then later on become my magic teacher. And that was what drew me so deeply to their work. There was something so incredibly resonant about this idea that you could manipulate reality through storytelling and art. And it was around that time that I started noticing for myself that there were things in my own songs that were coming true. And I had spent a long time, especially, when I was writing back in New York, and things that were more informed by my trauma patterns. I was writing a lot of sexy but tortured, unrequited love kind of things. And naturally, like, you feed those patterns, they're going to come back into your reality. And in moving out to Los Angeles, I began working on this album that I decided to name after the first song that I wrote for it, which is called Who Can You Trust? And I felt, even before I had finished the rest of the 5 songs, I felt very strongly that this album was going to be about the next progression. The previous one had been called It Looks Like Trouble, and it looked like trouble, and it was trouble. it all came true. And that sort of reinforcing, it's happening, but then I'm writing about it and it's happening again, et cetera, et cetera. And Who Can You Trust, I somehow knew was going to be about that sort of learning discernment after you've been burned, learning, like, literally learning who you can trust and not. And when I finished writing it, I finished writing the last song on it in summer of 2017. It came out in early 2018. And then in the fall of 2017, what should happen but the Me Too movement, which crested into the mainstream around October 2017. Of course, the hashtag was created much earlier by its creator, Tarana Burke. But this was the popularization of the movement. And I certainly wouldn't go around being like, oh, I wrote this little 5-song EP and it created this nationwide movement. I'm not that delulu. But as a magician, I think we owe it to ourselves to kind of look at, all right, I did X and Y happened. And I'm not going to try and attach myself to causation or prove causation. And I genuinely think I was just part of a larger wave of a zeitgeist that was ready to happen. But on some level, if you have a success, I think you owe it to your, and for me, the success was truly in my own repatterning, coming out and working through all of those past trauma patterns. And in that last song on the EP, transmuting them and creating space for something different. And when you have that happen, I think you owe it to yourself to say, like, well, that worked. What else will work? And so I began much more seriously using my songs as means of creating a narrative to work through and transmute something, or to bring something into being. And the next thing I did, and this album is not out yet, and it won't even be the next one I'm putting out. It will be the one that follows after that. So it will be a little while. But the next thing that happened was, I moved out to Los Angeles, and I had an experience that had all of the hallmarks of a twin flame awakening. And, it's bad enough talking about twin flames in the New Age community, but I feel like you talk about it in the occult and esoteric community, you're just gonna get, But what do you do if you legitimately, organically have an experience that you look up and you're like, all right, that matches, all this stuff is going on, and I'm seeing this from all these different, and I cannot possibly ignore this, and all of my divinations and readings are saying, like, yes, explore this and go down this path. So the next thing I did was I basically was like, well, if this is real, and if the twin flame, and I'm realizing as I'm speaking that maybe not everyone knows what it is. And twin flames is basically when you meet, your divine counterpart, someone who is like the mirror image of you, that, again, like, however polarized you are this way, they're as much polarized that way. And the only way that you can possibly be together is you have to not try and control them or how they do any of the work. You can only bring yourself into balance. So you control was under your own control. And because you are cyclically connected, you can also, to a degree, like, it's not so much that you're affecting them as it is like the energy that you bring to that container, you know, you will sort of like hopefully sort of dovetail on one another. And just by the virtue of that mirror, you can invite someone also into that greater sense of balance. So the way that the sort of lore goes is if you do this, if you get yourself to the 0 point, you're supposed to be able to be in union with your twin. And at the time I was like, you know, gosh, I'm traumatized coming out of New York, you know, and I get this twin flame awakening thrown at me, which is like not even like, oh, do a grimoire magic and summon some demons, at least that's cool. It's like this absolutely cheesy new age, and I'm just like, this, man, you know, but I had to know if it was real. So I hyper sigilized it. And my entire life changed. And while there's been a whole lot that has happened since, the mathematics of it and the way that it all fit together, and the way that I eventually managed to create a teaching that resolves the paradox of it was an incredible process. And like I said, there needs to be another album that comes out first for more than one reason. But you know, this, I get so excited now about thinking like, what else can I change? What other problems, quote unquote, can I digest and create art that literally transmutes not only my experience of the world, but maybe a greater collective experience too.
That transmutes and creates a greater collective experience too. And yeah, I love
just a mundane way of putting out the teaching, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I loved hearing that. I loved hearing that story, and also like how crafting your songs created those realities, and then there's a big shift when you came to Los Angeles, and how the narratives were structured and what that led to, and the hypersigilization leaned to now. And one thing I was also thinking about too is for your upcoming book project too, like it's aimed at a younger audience, if I'm correct. And
no, not necessarily. It is called and I did write the draft, and it's I don't know when it'll be out in the world yet. But it's called the Gifted Kid Program for Enlightenment. But what that is it's sort of about taking my own history as a neurodivergent gifted kid, and you know, the ways that we so often end up, you know, burned out, often traumatized, etc., you know, when we're adults. But we were always so good at things when we were kids. We are always the first to finish the test, you know. So we're always good at you know, things like pattern recognition, or things like, you know, if you put that hoop down in front of us, you know, we can jump through it. And then, at least for me anyway, you know, when you lose that structure of school, and then you go out in the world and you just have to navigate this sea of chaos, you know, without, it's like that Amanda Palmer lyric, you know, that Dresden Dolls lyric. I used to be the bright one, the perfect fit. Funny how you fall so far when teachers don't keep track of it. And basically saying like, all right, if you want to be your best self, if you want to achieve enlightenment, quote unquote, I use that a bit of tongue in cheek in the title, but it's the idea of like, no, this is the accelerated pathway. This is the Gifted Kid Program for Enlightenment. If you want to actually deal with your life and reality, I will give you the program that helps you to do that. So it's kind of like just a tongue in cheek kind of you know, way of saying, yeah, this is the fast track. This is the AP course, but you're good at AP courses. You can do this.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I think,
you know, it's a lot of material, but it's fine. We're good at that.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it. That sounds cool. I definitely resonate with that story, or with that type of childhood. Yeah, man. So like, if you were to give your younger self advice, or if you were to give the next generation of gifted kids, so to speak, or at that age, or of course, adults as well. Like, what would you tell them to nourish them or help them stay on that aligned track, so to speak, or whatever that looks like for them, their favorite self?
Yeah. Oh, what a great question. How would I phrase that? Yeah, I would just tell them backwards engineer, you know? Nothing is as personal as we make it, including our own personalities. And nothing is as true as our empirical experience would have us believe. Our experiences, our programming are so very specific to us and to our own timeline. And if we can loosen the grip that it has on us, again, our mind-body system is our domain, and lordship over it is our birthright. So we can truly, with this understanding, we can truly become who it is that we want to be.
Beautiful. Thank you. And we're coming close to the hour here. So I'm wondering, what are some of the best ways that people can follow you, get in contact with you or the course?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. All of the course material is at the repatterningproject.com. I do have a self-study version of it on the website in case there's anyone who is so inspired today that they want to begin it immediately. But the next one will be beginning in January 2025. We do a repatterning project every winter and every summer. And Myths and Magic will be starting in mid-October. And we'll do another one also in the spring, beginning in April. As far as social media, my handle on nearly everywhere is It's Me, Arden Leigh. I have a YouTube channel. I also, on Instagram, I have an account for the Repatterning Project, which is literally just at the Repatterning Project. And I do weekly live streams there as often as I can. And then Arden and the Wolves, Spotify, Instagram, Arden and the Wolves, wherever you can find us. And I will have a new album coming out in 2025, which is called the Bourbon Room Sessions. And it is a hyper sigil about supporting a recovery process.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That sounds awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to listening.
Thanks so much for having me today. I so
it's been a pleasure.